You know, the reason why this neighborhood has done a great job in the Sunset Neighborhood Association is because it's been over 20 years of partnerships. It's been really a history of people caring about the community and connecting on a lot of the opportunities out there that have surfaced. And so connecting with the leaders in the community in terms of residents, as well as city electives and community organizers has been hugely important in where they've gone. There's so many successes from the neighborhood libraries, in the front yards to the neighborhood events. All these have been reasons why it's been successful, and it's taken some time. There's 20 years of success and achievements and everybody's contributions.
These relationships are critical to have open communication, access, and trust. A network helps provide hope and calm fears when incidents occur, and this system is also used to transmit ideas, share information, and get truthful messaging out to the stakeholders. In no way do we want misinformation or an emotional testimony to fracture communities that are most in need.
So being part of the Pasadena gang unit, we had a lot of roles within the community, and part of that is having that engagement with the community. The community was very vital for us. They gave us information on how to combat the situations or whatever was going on in the neighborhood. Also, without their information and intelligence, obviously that role made it more difficult for us to do our job. Because of all this collaboration between the police department and the community, it allowed us to solve those issues, to understand those issues, understand the people who were involved with the issues in the neighborhood. So the community plays a vital component with the police department and how to mitigate issues within that community.
So police departments around the country, in order to get to a better place, they have to contribute. They have to be part of what we're talking about. They have to be part of the conversation. And to do that, it's a matter of educating at every opportunity around every corner to the successes in the community and connecting the efforts of everybody to opportunities that exist. So issues will come up, critical events will happen, especially in policing. That's not the time to pull back. We have to be as transparent as we can in our communities, and spending almost 37 years here in this great city, it's important to have partnerships over the decades. And that's one of the reasons the Sunset Neighborhood Association has been so successful, is that it ensured that everybody was a partnership to include the police department.
So anyway, my name is Susanna Porras, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to strategize and really motivate your grassroots leaders to stay engaged in your communities. And so, do you think people will vote for me? That is Pedro's line from the film Napoleon Dynamite. And you can really feel the self-doubt in the line from that film. And the funny thing is that he's asking his very own friend if you'd vote for him. So he has all of this, self-doubt about himself. He doesn't even believe his own friend would vote for him. And his friend Napoleon Dynamite, with all of the confidence in the world, says to him, heck yeah, I'd vote for you. And so we all need that Napoleon Dynamite in our lives to get us through some things, right? And so today I'm going to be sharing with you my personal Pedro story. I too was Pedro at one point, and I mean that metaphorically speaking, right? And I'm going to be telling you about all of the Napoleon Dynamites in my life, or at least some of them, who helped me on my journey and supported me and cheered me on as a grassroots leader in the city of Pasadena, California. And so, but before I get started today, I'm going to give you a little bit of background for some context. My parents immigrated to the United States in the 1970s, fleeing the violence of the Guatemalan Civil War, and they arrived in the city of Pasadena, California. Now, as beautiful of a city that Pasadena is, it is no different than other cities its size. It has its beautiful areas and its not so nice areas. And needless to say, my parents were looking for a nice, safe place to live. But places like that are a little bit of a challenge for immigrant working class people like my parents, because they tend to be more expensive. And so they got a little bit creative, and they figured out that if they could locate some of the more rundown properties in some of the nicer neighborhoods, that they could afford the rent. They were very successful in doing this, and as a result, I grew up in one of the nicest neighborhoods of the city of Pasadena. You can almost say that I grew up in a bubble. I was exposed very little to law enforcement or crime, only what I saw on television, and even that wasn't very much. It was also a wonderful place for my mom to live as well because she didn't drive, and everything was within walking distance of the house. The post office, the grocery store, the park, the library, the bus stop, my school, the place where she worked, the hospital, and even a liquor store where she bought her lottery tickets every Friday. My mom was kind of in a rush to achieve the American dream. And so everything was perfect about this neighborhood. Everything except for one thing. Every time I asked my parents if I could paint my room pink, or I suggested, some change being made to the house, my parents always gave me the same answer. They always said, we rent here. And so from a very young age, I just really wanted to buy my own house. And so I grew up, I went to college, I graduated, I got my first job as a public high school teacher, and I went off to the real estate agent to buy my first house. And I want you to imagine for just a moment what you can purchase in the city of Pasadena, California on a public school teacher salary. Not much, right? And so like my parents many years earlier, I'd managed to find a very dilapidated piece of property. But unlike my parents, I didn't manage to find it in a very nice area. As a matter of fact, it was located in the exact same neighborhood that my parents had worked so hard for so many years to keep me out of. My new neighborhood did resemble my old neighborhood in some ways though. It had a park around the corner where I never saw children play. It had a post office, but you risked your life crossing the boulevard to get there. We had the exact same chain grocery store as the area where I grew up. But for some reason, it sold meats in colors I had never seen before. And I had my choice of not one, but 3 liquor stores. But unlike my mom, I never really picked up the habit of buying lottery tickets. And so in many more ways, it was really a stark contrast to how I grew up. It was an area that was riddled with crime, drugs, violence, gangs, and prostitution. And so I found myself doing what many people do when they find themselves in a situation like this. I did absolutely nothing. When you ignore situations like this, they don't go away. They actually get worse. And that's exactly what happened for the next 6 years. And other than the occasional phone call that I would make to the police department when things got really bad, I really didn't do anything to address any of the issues that were happening in the neighborhood. And one day, a new family moves into the neighborhood, and it's a couple, their toddler, and the wife is pregnant out to here with her second kid. I remember that instead of being happy that we had a new family in the neighborhood, I was completely horrified. All I could think of was, this is a tragedy waiting to happen. And in that same moment, I thought, this isn't going to happen on my watch. And so I contacted the Pasadena Police Department, and they sent over a community services officer. And her suggestion was that I form a neighborhood watch. And I told the lady, I said, you know what, I'm sorry, that's just not a good idea. I'm not from the neighborhood. I know absolutely nothing about community organizing. And really the saddest part was I couldn't even think of one neighbor who would follow me into a neighborhood watch meeting. And so I sat on the idea for a little bit and I thought about it, and I thought I better at least give it a try. So I made myself a little flyer and I began knocking on doors and telling my neighbors all about this neighborhood meeting. I left out the watch part. I was going to let the police department explain that. And I told them that we were meeting to talk about the parking and traffic issues in the neighborhood, because I was going to let the police department explain the other stuff, right? And something really interesting happened that day when I spoke with neighbors and told them all of the reasons why I wanted to meet. They all gave me the exact same response. They all said to me, oh yeah, and we should also talk about the gang bangers down the street. And so that kicked off what would be the first of many well-attended neighborhood watch meetings, and the first of many suggestions that we would follow from the Pasadena Police Department and other departments in the city of Pasadena. The second being to host a block party for National Night Out, If you're not familiar with National Night Out, it's America's Night Out Against Crime. Happens the first Tuesday in August. And this time I called the area lieutenant and I said, look buddy, I said, this is really not a good idea. I didn't think it was a good idea at the time because the gang members were having block parties of their own, almost on a weekly basis, with 40 of their closest friends until about 4 o'clock in the morning. And the lieutenant really wasn't fazed by this, and he said, don't worry about it, they won't show up. Sure enough, he was right, they didn't show up. But the kids did. And for the first time in 6 years, we saw children playing on the street. And that really solidified for us what would become our collective goal for the entire neighborhood, to create an environment where children could thrive. It wasn't anything that we yelled out from the rooftops or that we even wrote down on a piece of paper. It was just a general understanding that it was our responsibility, that that's what we needed to do. And so that is my first suggestion that I have for you as people who work with grassroots leaders. You need to help them define what that goal is going to be. And it has to be a sustainable goal. Obviously, we all had crime reduction on our minds, but it wasn't anything that any of us were willing to put our necks out for. But the kids, we were. Obviously, crime reduction was something that we needed to address to reach our goal, but it wasn't something that we were going to address first. And so you need to find out what that goal is going to be for your grassroots leaders. Not everybody's going to have kids as their priority. It might be seniors, sustainability, walkability, pets, and so forth. You need to find what that goal is going to be. And so here we were, we had our goal. And we began having these little achievements in the neighborhood. But it never failed that something big would always happen in the neighborhood. And we always felt like we were taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. And so what did the city of Pasadena do to keep me, the quintessential reluctant grassroots leader, engaged long enough to actually make a difference? And so they used a multifaceted approach. And so the various departments, including police, fire, parks and rec, and public works, all provided a staggered but constant flow of training, guidance, and resources. Now, the Pasadena Police Department was our biggest ally during this time, but I would like to emphasize that our partnership wasn't based on what you would consider to be traditional law enforcement methods. They were most of them were alternative, like Neighborhood Watch, with the National Institute of Crime Prevention called CPTED, that's crime prevention through environmental design, and citizen-centered law enforcement and leadership training. And so I'm going to be using some of our crime reduction techniques to illustrate some of the ways that the city kept myself and others engaged, motivated, and focused on our goal. CPTED was probably the lengthiest of the processes that we used, but it is one of the most effective crime reduction techniques that I have seen. Now, I am not trained in CPTED. I was merely a recipient of it, as my neighbors were, and we were guided through the entire process by trained members of the Pasadena Police Department. One unintended benefit of CPTED was that it gave us the power and the control back. And so it's very discouraging when you're trying to make change in your community, your neighborhood, and your organization. It's very easy to become frustrated from what you perceive as the lack of progress. And so you want to make sure that you become proactive and engaged in your community so that you wait for these other things that are going to happen to fall into place. In our case, we were waiting for the Pasadena Police Department to do their surveillance and do their investigations and make an arrest. We were waiting for the Public Works Department to make some infrastructure changes. We were waiting for the Planning Department to design the new playground area and install the children's playground area in the park. And so CPTED allowed us to become part of the process. And so CPTED has 4 overlapping strategies. They are natural surveillance, natural access control, territorial reinforcement, and maintenance. I'm going to briefly explain these to you. So natural surveillance increases the perception that people can be seen through the placement of physical features, activities, and people in a way that maximizes visibility. And so the basic idea behind this is that people are less likely to commit a crime if they think they're being watched or they are being watched. Our area lieutenant at the time pointed out to us that by hiding in our shrub-covered homes behind closed doors, windows, and drapes, we had essentially created the problem. We had created an environment where the gay members were comfortable because they knew nobody was watching them. And so if we wanted to reverse this, we needed to at least begin by creating the illusion that we were watching them. And so let me give you a quick example of this. I sometimes like to take my afternoon walks in some of the more affluent neighborhoods of the city of Pasadena. One can drink. I get that from my mom. And in those neighborhoods, the homeowners love unobstructed views through their windows. And consequently, anybody walking by can see everything inside. And it never fails that I'm always tempted to look, because I really want to check out the furniture, right? But I never look. And the reason I never look is because I always feel like somebody's watching me, or that any moment someone could walk into that living room and see me staring at them. And so I don't look, and I keep walking. And so that's kind of the same feeling that we needed to recreate in our neighborhood. And so before I go into some of the changes that we made, I'd like to point out that these improvements happened over a period of almost 20 years. What makes this particular neighborhood so remarkable, and why I like to cite it so much, is that this is not your typical case of gentrification. It's not that all the residents left, all the residents moved in, they made the houses really pretty, and now we have a great neighborhood, right? This is a case of a working class community that took back their neighborhood. If you look at the census records of the people who lived there in the 1930s and 40s, you're going to find that the residents were stonemasons, gardeners, and mechanics. If you're going to knock on the doors of people who live there today, you're going to find construction workers, gardeners, and mechanics. And so these are people who do not dispose of great amounts of disposable income to make major overnight changes to their homes. And so there was a lot of DIY, sprinkled with TLC, and countless hours of HD TV, right? And so some of the changes that we made in the area of natural surveillance were that we cleared out a lot of landscaping following the 2-foot, 6-foot rule, which means that no hedges were over 2 feet, and the clearance under the trees was at least 6 feet, so that there was increased visibility. We also took down a lot of the bars from windows, opened up the drapes, took out the patio furniture and the children's playground furniture to the front yards. But the biggest change that we made in this category was lighting. It never once dawned on me that the deficient lighting in the neighborhood was contributing to the crime. Not only were we not watching the gang members, even if we were, we couldn't see them. It was pitch dark out there. We had a very thick canopy of oak trees. And so I found a 2019 published study of street lighting in New York City by the University of Chicago Crime Lab that found that street lights that were randomly allocated in public housing experienced sizable reductions in crime. In some cases, a minimum of 36% reduction in nighttime outdoor index crimes. And so that's a really big difference. And so the Pasadena Public Works Department suggested that we take out a petition and have all of the neighbors sign this petition so that the street lights could get upgraded. We did that very easily. We went door to door, talked to all the neighbors, and they happily signed that we were going to get new street lights. The unintended benefit of doing that, though, by going from neighbor to neighbor and pointing out the deficient lighting issue, was that it prompted the neighbors to install their own lighting configurations themselves. Again, this is a working class neighborhood. They didn't do anything too elaborate, but they did maybe install an extra porch light, a sensor light, twinkly lights, solar lights, and some people like me ended up maybe just leaving the porch light on all night. Okay? You're probably thinking lighting is expensive, and yes, it can be. The same study cited that over a 3-year period, it would be cheaper to install street lights than hire a full-time police officer. Makes sense, right? And the city city of Pasadena at the time, coincidentally, decided to distribute low energy light bulbs. And those were actually the light bulbs that I used for years on my porch. And so, yes, it can cost a few cents more, but is it worth it? In my opinion, absolutely. So, natural access control. Natural access control means controlling access to a space. You want to make sure that your designated spaces are being used for their intended purpose and that people are physically being moved through the spaces by the strategic designs of streets, sidewalks, building entrances, and landscaping. One of the problems that we were having was that the gang members were parking and partying, and they were spilling over into the street, the parkways, the sidewalks, and the driveways. And so they really took over the entire area. And so we really needed to define the spaces for what they needed to be used for. We called the Public Works Department and had them repaint over all of the signage that was on the street, over all the bump signs, over all the lines, over all the stop signs, to redefine what that area was supposed to be used for. We also began planting on the parkways. You want to make sure that you don't plant anything that is thorny, that might hurt somebody, especially a child. But we began planting some items on the parkways that were to annoy people or keep people from actually standing around in the parkways. The city of Pasadena has a defined planting list of items that can be planted. So that's something that you're going to have to check with your cities if you have an approved planting list, if there's anything that you can't plant there at all. Okay? Territorial reinforcement. Just like gang members like to graffiti everything and mark their territory, I'm not asking you to do that, but I am asking you to define your spaces by showing your personality either with paint, decorative fencing, pavers, artwork, even public art. Some way to show that there's someone who lives there and that the person who lives there cares. Now, my neighborhood took territorial reinforcement to a whole new level. The grocery store with the questionable meat, closed its doors and finally left. And a new store wanted to come into the neighborhood. And this is your quintessential neighborhood grocery store because it is completely surrounded by houses. And so the neighbors didn't want a grocery store back, but they weren't having anything that wasn't going to be perfect. And so they wanted a beautiful storefront, they wanted jobs, they wanted excellent customer service, and more importantly, they wanted the highest quality food possible. And so we held multiple meetings and focus groups with city officials, city staff, advocates, residents, and store owners. Luckily enough, they were just as interested to come into our neighborhood as we wanted a good quality grocery store, and they met all of our demands. And as a result, they invested millions of dollars into this new grocery store, and now we have one of the most beautiful grocery stores in the city of Pasadena. And so beautiful things can happen if you take ownership of your area. And so once you've done all of these things, you can't just set it and forget it, right? You have to maintain it. And my philosophy has been for many years when working with, and I had to learn this by the way, I didn't agree with this at the very beginning, was that if you want to have a nice neighborhood, it's a 50-50% partnership. This isn't something I learned from the city of Pasadena. This is my personal take on this. You need to, as an owner or as a renter, you need to be 50% responsible for what's happening in your area, and the city needs to be 50% responsible for what's happening in the area. And so you need partnerships. And the city of Pasadena has a couple of wonderful partnerships. One of them is the Citizen Service Center, which is accessible via phone, computer, or app. And it lists all of the different services that are available by the city of Pasadena, whether you need graffiti abatement, or a street light is burnt out, or there's a car illegally parked. You can call any problem or issue that you see into the Citizen Service Center, and it will be addressed in at least 1 to 3 days if it's something that's pretty easy to fix. And so it's very easy to use, it's very accessible to anybody. The second partnership that I really, really like, this is pretty new in the city of Pasadena, is the Community Cleanup Day. Any neighborhood association or nonprofit can call into the Pasadena Police Department and arrange a community cleanup day. And this is a day where city officials, city staff, the Pasadena Police Department, and the group that has prompted the request to come in and join and clean up the area. So it's a wonderful collaboration, and everybody is working on the same goal that same day with immediate results. And I absolutely love this picture because here you have a regular resident, you have Council Member John G. Kennedy, and you also have one of our area commanders working to clean up the neighborhood. Okay. Information, content, relevance, and usefulness. Knowledge is power only if man knows a fact to bother with. So, one of the challenges that we were facing in our neighborhood was a lack of economic development. And this was before the new grocery store came in. And we really needed some new businesses in the area. So you can't imagine how happy we were when we find out that Starbucks and a well-known athletic clothing store were coming to our area. I mean, we were excited about the new building with the shiny new windows and the jobs and the businesses themselves. We were super excited, and we knew that as neighbors that we were going to have to do everything that we could to support these businesses so that they could survive and thrive. One day, a few months after they had been established, I'm going by there and I noticed all of the window displays on the boulevard and down the avenue for the clothing store all had red outfits. You know, the shoes, the socks, the shorts, the pants, the shirts, the jackets, and the hats were all red. And I thought, oh, that's so wonderful, holiday window displays. And then I realized it was March, and that Christmas and Valentine's Day had been over for weeks. And then I got really confused, and I remembered this brochure that had been given to me by the Neighborhood Connections office. And it was a brochure, a really old brochure, about 30 years old at the time. I could tell by the writing and the suggestions it had in it. It was a police brochure, and it was on how to curtail gang activity in the neighborhood. And one of the small tips was on there was that if you happen to find a local business selling gang bandanas, to please approach the manager or the owner and ask them to please stop selling the bandanas. And I almost found it to be kind of a comical, suggestion, and I had forgotten about it until I saw all the red outfits in all of the window displays. And then for a moment I thought, is it possible that the store is catering to the local gang members in the neighborhood? And I kind of very quickly wrote it off. I thought, I'm sure it's probably just part of their new spring line, right? But I couldn't get that nagging feeling out of my head. And so that weekend I hop in my car and I head down to the local mall where they have the exact same store. So I'm strolling through the store and I spot the storefront from about maybe 400 or 500 feet away. And when I saw it, I thought I was going to be sick because I couldn't find a square inch of red clothing in any of the window displays in the store. But I took a couple of deep breaths and I thought, you know what, not all of the stores are going, I'm still trying to reason with myself, not all of the stores are going to display their clothing the same way in their storefronts, right? And so I go into the store, and it was one of those stores with the really high walls, and I look up, and I look down, and I look left, and I look right, and I look all around, and I couldn't find a single article of red clothing in the store. And by now the store clerk has noticed me. And he walks over to me and he asks me if I need anything. And needless to say, by now I'm pretty flustered. And I blurt out, I'm looking for a red shirt. And he says to me, he's like, I don't think we have any at the moment. But let me go look. So he leaves to go look, and he finds 2 red t-shirts under a pile this high of white, black, and gray t-shirts. Luckily, they weren't my size and I ran out of the store. And so I ran back to the neighborhood and I told my neighbors what I had essentially discovered. And we penned a letter to the store manager, the corporate office, and we CC the Pasadena Police Department, our local council member, and we make the incredibly difficult decision to boycott the store. A few months later, the store closes and now we have a chase back. And so what I'm trying to tell you with this story is, if it wouldn't have been for the incredible foresight of this particular department, to weed out all of the information that would have probably taken me months to look through on the computer, and to give me the specific information that they thought I needed for my particular neighborhood, I would have never made the connection between what was happening in the store and what was happening in the neighborhood. So it's very important for you who are working with your neighborhoods to help them and figure that out so that they don't get frustrated with the process. Okay? Help grassroots leaders pursue their passions. A great leader's courage to fulfill his vision comes from passion, not decision. John C. Maxwell. It's very easy when you're a city staff and as organizations who are working with neighborhoods to become jaded. It's just easier to say no. Can't help you, right? It will be much easier for you if you say, let me see how we can figure it out. I guarantee you, you may not be able to see it immediately, but in a year or 2 or 10, you will see the results of that vision that they had. In 2012, I was sitting in my room, and all I heard was dead silence. And for the first time, I remember thinking, it's finally over. All of the nuisance activity, all of the chaos that we had been experiencing was finally over. And that made me very nervous. Because as bad as that was, it was the one thing that was really keeping the neighborhood together. And I knew that if we wanted to continue being a unified group, we were probably going to have to end up working twice as hard. And so I dove into the world of the internet to look for a neighborhood project. I wanted something that would garner neighborhood interest, something that would embrace our collective goal, and more importantly, I was looking for something cheap. This is still a working class neighborhood, right? And I found the Little Free Library. Now, the Little Free Library's mission is to build community, to inspire readers, and to expand book access. And I absolutely fell in love with the idea. Now, at the time, the Little Free Library concept was still a fairly new concept, and we didn't have that many because we have one library within a mile of every resident who lives there. It's a great concept, but as all of you know, in some neighborhoods, a mile is a really long way to walk. And so that made the Little Free Library for our neighborhood all the more perfect because we had gang territory going north and we had gang territory going south. And so I wanted to engage as many people as possible in this project. And I wanted to make it a sustainable project. And so I called on the help of an estate sale company. If you're not familiar with estate sales, they usually liquidate residential or commercial property within 1 to 4 days. Whatever's left over is sold in bulk, donated or dumped. And I asked them for construction materials. If you've ever been to an estate sale, you'll find that there's always a piece of wood somewhere, nails, screws, or there's some leftover paint. It took about 6 months to get enough materials to build a Little Free Library. And somebody donated their time to build it, somebody else donated a park bench, and we added a drinking fountain for good measure. And then we had to find a place for it. And I needed to put it in a place that was communal. I needed to make it public. It wasn't my Little Free Library, it's for the entire neighborhood, right? And so I wanted to place it in the parkway. Well, the city said, absolutely not. It is a city property, and you are not allowed to place any tripping hazards or obstructions in the parkway. And so I went back and forth with code enforcement for a while, and we finally came to a compromise where we placed the Little Free Library at the furthest corner of my front yard, closest to the sidewalk, and we built the picket fence behind it so as to carve out a small section for the neighborhood. On opening day, we celebrate with cake, a ribbon cutting, and we invited friends, neighbors, and community partners to celebrate the Little Free Library. It was a very well attended, a very well received event. During the event, one of the lieutenants comes over to me, and he takes me to the side, and he whispers, and he tells me, he's like, I don't think this is a very good idea. And he's like, I'm going to provide you with some extra patrol. And I'm very happy to report that it was a good idea. It was that our estate sale friends continued to provide us with books on an as-needed basis. It really became a communal space where parents in the neighborhood could exchange books. And for many of the kids in the neighborhood whose parents both worked, would come and get books themselves. I absolutely love watching the kids hanging off the little free library getting their own books. And so it really turned out to be a wonderful project. And so I really encourage you to, if your neighborhood leaders have a vision, to see how you can follow through, because you never know, what you're going to get. Leadership training, it takes a village to raise a grassroots leader. By the time I made the decision to get involved in my neighborhood, I was at my breaking point. We had tolerated a lot of poor behavior, and we were rewarded with more poor behavior until the situation was completely intolerable. And I had a real coming to Jesus moment when our community services officer came up to me and said, the issues that you're facing right now are from decades of accumulated neglect, and change is going to take time. When I realized that improvement was going to take years, I got desperate, and I began looking for every possible way to shorten the time, including going to training. I enrolled in the Pasadena Neighborhood Leadership Institute, PNLI, that's Community Police Academy, CAP, Citizens Assisting Pasadena Police, CERT, the Fire Department's Certified Emergency Response Team. I even enrolled in the Department of Water and Power's gray water and composting workshops. I did it all. As desperate as I was and as eager as I was to receive that training, it wasn't easy. I mean, I was working full-time, I was going to school part-time, and I had to run a household. And so going to training after a long day and a full week was a real big challenge for me. But I think the city of Pasadena really understood that, and they made the training very accessible. They gave classes in both English and Spanish. They gave the classes in the evenings or on the weekends. Everything was free. All the training materials were free. They even provided full meals on many occasions, and when they didn't, they gave us beverages and snacks. And they provided many opportunities to network with other people and other staff members and people who knew what they were talking about, and opportunities to attend conferences. In 2008, I graduated from the Pasadena Neighborhood Leadership Institute, and the Neighborhood Connections office at the time offered me a scholarship to attend the Neighborhoods USA conference in Hampton, Virginia. At the time, I didn't see how a 3-day conference was going to possibly help me after having worked diligently with my neighbors for 2 full years at the time. But I'm not one to pass up a free trip. And so I went to Hampton, Virginia, Cap Beach, And so I arrived in Hampton, Virginia in 2008. Was also the year that the housing market bubble burst. And one of the issues that we were grappling with at the time was an empty lot that was not being well maintained by its owner. It wasn't fenced in, it was overgrown, it was being dumped in, squatted in, parked in, and it was a fire hazard. I cannot begin to tell you what a thorn on my side this little empty lot was. I arrived in NUSA that year only to find out that the communities that were being represented there that year were experiencing what I was experiencing on a major scale. They had dozens and dozens and dozens of foreclosures that were being dumped in, not being well maintained in, and they were being vandalized. And so that made my problem, that when I arrived at NUSA that was this big, seem that big. Very small. It made it seem much more manageable. Actually, I was very embarrassed to even talk about my dumb little lot right at that point. And so another thing that NUSA did for me that year is that I met grassroots leaders from every spectrum. People who had started off before me, people who were where I was at the time, and people who were, had already made it, and they were gloating about all of the things that they had done in the neighborhood. Kind of like me today, right? And so the city of Pasadena really did a lot for me to really motivate me in many ways to come back, and also NUSA, to come back to my neighborhood and continue working to make it a better place. Little did I know it was going to be another 4 years before we finally got many of the issues cleared up. So why grassroots leaders? One of my pet peeves is our nation's obsession with national politics, almost to a fault. And we forget that our local leaders are the ones that make decisions that directly impact our day-to-day lives. They are the ones that are making decisions on policies, infrastructure, and budgets. So they're basically the ones that are making decisions about your streetlights, about your sidewalks, and everything else, right? Yet most people can't even name their local town council member or their council member, and that's really scary to me. And so since day one, when I first started working on this, I knew that I needed to find replacements because it made absolutely no sense for me to make the neighborhood better and for it to all fall apart the day that I left. And so that has been my focus as a grassroots leader and now as a staff member of the City of Pasadena to continue looking for leaders in our community, people who are going to work as staff people in the City of Pasadena and other local governments, neighborhood watch captains, neighborhood association presidents, commissioners, and maybe somebody who may want to run for public office, right? We need people who really know and understand the neighborhoods, and they're going to have the courage to stand up and be able to make decisions that are going to be good for the good of the whole, not just for a certain group of people, right? We want people who really understand that. One of the kids that I was trying to work on was 10 years old when I first moved into the neighborhood, and eventually grows up, and when I start working in the city council offices, I take him on as one of my interns. And eventually he actually got a job with the LA County Supervisor's Office, so he did pretty well for himself. And one day we were sitting in the office and we were chit-chatting with the area commander. And he had been our area lieutenant, and coincidentally he's now our interim chief. And we were chit-chatting about all of the issues we had faced, you know, in all those years that we cleaned up the neighborhood, all of the shootings and the drugs and the gangs and everything. And my intern/neighbor got really quiet. And I thought we said something that offended him or maybe jerked a memory or something. And I was almost afraid to ask him. I said, did we say something to offend you? And he says to me, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't realize that we had allowed this kid to grow up in his own bubble in this neighborhood. And that touched me so much because I remember people smoking crack yards from his house. And for him not to have noticed that was incredible to me. And so, just to finish all of this off, I would like to emphasize that there's no such thing as a bad idea. If you've noticed from all of the ideas that I presented to you. This year we are going to be celebrating our 15th block party. It would have been our 17th, but COVID happened. So we will be celebrating our 15th annual block party. It's one of the biggest block parties in the city of Pasadena. The neighbors really go all out. And we will, this month, on the 18th of this month, we will be celebrating the 10th birthday of our little free library. And we're celebrating almost 20 years of a wonderful partnership with the Pasadena Police Department and other departments in the city of Pasadena. And so with that, my name is Susanna Porras, and I am here to answer any questions for you. I am available to speak with you now or later via the email, and you can find me either on LinkedIn or on Instagram. So thank you very much.
So one of the most important parts of all this is public safety, law enforcement personnel, from the front line to the executives, to going out there and educating the community as to what the challenges are in policing. The Sunset Neighborhood Association has always been welcoming, has always encouraged appearances by the police department to make sure the transparency is there, whether the information wasn't going to be taken well, or in fact, we're trying to brainstorm for solutions in the future. That's where you start. So the police department cannot give that up. At the same time, the community and the Sunset Neighborhood Association is a great example of this. There's got to be continual conversations, relationships, and the points of engagement around every turn.
Continue building neighborhood livability by having everyone's contact information and sharing this data as needed. Know your neighbor. Have the ability to reach out when you see something that's out of place in your neighborhood. Don't be afraid to report suspicious activity, and never ever assume someone else will call to report an incident on your behalf.
So there are numerous resources and tools for neighborhood leaders in order to try to make this change occur within a neighborhood. Your local police department is there to collaborate with you. There are neighborhood programs that you can start with your local community relations division or office within that police department. But you have to be active within that community. You have to get out there. You have to get your neighborhood to want to make those changes, to not be afraid to make those changes. And again, once again, collaborate with the police department. The police department is here for the community. We want safe streets. We want to be able to see kids play out. We want to see people walk in at night with their dogs. That is the ultimate goal of the police department, is public safety.
Developing relationships, having open lines of communication, as well as access to the right resources to solve neighborhood problems is paramount. Assessments of these relationships should be frequent and ongoing, as continued maintenance of collaborative efforts will ensure common goals and shared concerns are at the forefront of ongoing efforts for community livability.